Welcome and thank you all for joining us to another session, and a very special one at that, of the Evaluation Observatory, which is a platform for peer learning and knowledge exchange in the social impact and evaluation ecosystem. I'm Sabina Matthias, I'm Vice President at Sabodhi Research and Communications, and it is my distinct honor to bring together a very distinguished and diverse set of panelists today, and who come with very deep practitioner insights. We're actually Before I introduce them and allow me to set the context a little bit, we're actually going to be discussing a lot about child maltreatment and child protection programs today, and actually the sheer range of spaces that it tends to occupy. Most, most particularly, today's webinar, or rather our peer learning panel, in which we brought together a whole host of practitioners, we're going to try and understand different kinds of interventions, implementation challenges, and risks involved in understanding the role of education and skill development initiatives under the child social protection programs. We want to focus our overall learning on how we arrive at new indicators to assess new education programs, which are looking beyond enrollment and dropout rates while studying the role of education and skill development in preventing child malpractices. Further, we're going to even explore indicators for reintegrative policy interventions, such as skill building exercises and livelihood promotion programs that bring victims of child labor and other traumas back into the folds of mainstream society. The focus is expected to substantiate, especially in the case of children rescued from trafficking, by inducting them into education programs and enabling a bridge between vulnerability and being self-sufficient adults. That being said, I have quite an amazing panel for you today. We're going to be led by Preeti Mahara, who is going to go ahead and talk to us a little bit more. She is a child rights and gender inclusion practitioner with over 19 years of experience across India, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. Her last professional commitment was with Child Rights in You, most famously known as CRY, as Director Policy, Research and Advocacy, and had been part of the advisory committees at NITI Aayog and HRC on child rights and child protection. Before that, she's also worked with SOS Children with It International, Plan India, and various other organizations. As an advisor and technical consultant, she has worked with many grassroots organizations, INGOs, UN, and corporates on the issue of child rights and gender-based programming and evidence-based advocacy. Preeti Mahara, over to you.
Namaskar and a very good evening to everyone. Well, now that we already know why we are here today, so let me straight come to the point. We all here know the benefits of education to both children and larger society. So there is a section of population where we have been struggling to make everyone understand this importance. But as civil society and as policy makers and policy influencers who knows the importance, the question is, have we done enough to educate and protect children? If we have done something, can we say that, it has worked, it hasn't worked? What we should do more to educate children and also to protect children, and where do we see the linkages? So today we will be discussing all this in this panel discussion. Also, we know is education can potentially break the intergenerational cycles of not only poverty, but deprivation by empowering and enabling children to gain the knowledge and skills essential to cope up with the challenges of life. And there are evidences, there are very strong evidences that link education with the improvements in health and nutrition. And most likely, children who are out of school are more likely to get exploited and abused. There are higher chances of them likely to come into or pushed into conflict with law, getting trafficked, and are more vulnerable to various other forms of child exploitation like child marriage and child labor. Also important is to ensure safety of children and ensure quality of education so that those who are within the school system don't leave it or drop out. The one aspect is to bring the dropouts of the children who are out of school to bring them into the school system. And the other challenge is to retain the children who are already in the schools, so giving them that kind of safe environment, giving the quality of education, so that they remain there and don't leave. So we all know, especially in India and many developing countries, especially in India, enrollment now is not that big issue. What is challenging is the retention. Okay. So when I'm talking about the school safety related issues, we know that RT also bans the corporal punishment and talks about physical and mental abuse of children within schools. And we have Supreme Court order to have POCSO committees in schools to address child sexual abuse. We have NCRT guidelines and the state level education department's guidelines and orders in place to ensure school safety. But the question again is it working? Is it not working? Where are we right now? Also in our country, we have right to education that paved way to universal elementary education for children, and we did good in terms of elementary level enrollments, but the quality of education, as I said, and achieving RT norms or learning levels of children, etc., still in question. We also have Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan. It is also important to know what is the policy and the legal framework in the country. So we have Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan, the integrated scheme for school education that subsumed Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, RMSA, and teacher education. Now we have the Prabandh project appraisal, budgeting, achievements, and data handling system under the this is a centrally sponsored scheme under Samagra Shiksha. Through this, government tries to take the education indicators, and we have NEP, we all know, which is directly linked with the SDG goal 4 that talks about by 2030 all girls and boys complete free, equitable, and quality primary and secondary education. But I'm sure the pandemic has derailed everything and has put in like more and more challenges before us. There are prominent organizations that have raised the alarm that the pandemic has increased child marriage, child labor, traffic, and school dropouts, especially in the developing countries. This certainly has increased the child vulnerability, and we'll talk about this more in the panel discussion with our esteemed panel. So today, as I said, we will be talking about how to design and evaluate better education programs so that its impact could be measured and monitored, not only in terms of education, but also in terms of larger social protection and child protection. So to deliberate on these issues, we have an esteemed panel with us. As I mentioned, and without taking any further time, allow me to introduce our panelist here. So Dr. Nair is advisor to Chairperson National Skill Building Mission and former Director General of the National Disaster Response Force. He has done his PhD in victimology and MA in sociology. After 35 years in the IPS across Bihar as CBI, NHRC, UNODC, CRPF, etc., he retired on 31st May 2013 as the Director General of National Disaster Response Force and Director General of Civil Defense Government. We all know him as a powerful voice in the anti-human trafficking mission and child rights. Dr. Nair, we welcome you, sir, and look forward to your expert comments. Let me introduce our second panelist. Our second panelist is Preeti Patkar. Preeti is the co-founder and executive secretary of the NGO Prerna, working to end intergenerational trafficking and protect rights of children. She pioneered the Night Care Center for the safety of children living in the brothel area, which is the first of its kind in the world. Over the last 33 years, over 15,000 children have benefited from comprehensive support. She's also a recipient of Ashoka Fellowship and Nari Shakti Purashkar, awarded by the President of India. In July 2021, she was appointed member of the Central Authority. Welcome, Preeti. Our Third panelist is Naveen Selaraju. Naveen is the CEO of Railway Children India. Over the last 15 years, Naveen has been instrumental in shaping the growth story of RCI and working towards all railway stations child-friendly across India. His contributions range from incubating the fundraising and advocacy vertical at RCI, nurturing strategic relationship with the government, and creating strong child rights program models. Welcome, Naveen. Our fourth panelist is Suresh Kumar. Suresh is the executive director at the Center Direct. The organization works in the space of women empowerment and child protection. Currently, it has been rebuilding the lives of over 700 child trafficking survivors who had rescued from bangle making factories situation across Jaipur. The organization also spearheads the child trafficking survival movement in Bihar. He is a recipient of Acumen Fellowship and had studied law at the Delhi University. Welcome, Suresh. Okay, let me first go to each panelist for their opening remarks to reflect on how, in their experience, they see the link between education and child protection. Preeti, can you please share your opening remarks, and can you reflect on, based on your experience, how you see the education and the child protection linkages in your in Prerna?
Thank you very much for inviting me here, and thank you, Preeti, for the introductions as well. I frankly don't see any linkages. I don't think education and child protection intersects at all. And if at all we've seen intersection, then this is because of a few individuals, either individuals within the system or individual within the civil society organizations, or a few attempts made by, through a public-private partnership. I've seen that happening. And I've also seen that disappearing and not, I don't think it has become systemic. There is no uniformity at all when it comes to, a child's right to development intersecting with child protection. And in today's topic, the topic that we've taken up today, where we are talking about violence against children, we are talking about, different forms of violence and maltreatment. I think if we want to achieve anything, any goals around education, so I see education in two aspects. One is, education as in creating awareness. And here, when I'm talking about education, I am referring to our education system, okay? The schooling system, the educational institutions. And I feel that if we are not, if a child is not going to feel safe, if the child is not going to be feeling safe, and his family and the community is not going to feel that the child is safe in the educational system, we are going to see what we are seeing today, a high rate of dropout, no retention. The other is, I feel somewhere the academic institutions, which are, in the midst of the community, should also, their mandate should also be a child learning safe in school and outside school. And I don't think we've gone anywhere closer to seeing how, if a child is not within an educational institution, it's an alarm for us. Somewhere we should be concerned as to, is it because the child's safety outside the school, within the community, is being compromised? So I definitely don't see it. And, closer to what child protection is, I feel very often it's very tokenism and very decorative. So when it comes to child protection, we have, to a great extent, I'll link it to child friendly. So we have these beautiful paintings within the schools. We have beautifully painted walls. We may have a few infrastructural facilities, but definitely not the human element, the element that interacts with the children is definitely, they definitely don't understand child protection. And again, my last remark here would be, when you're talking about child protection and intersecting with education, let us not all the time think it is only the teaching staff who needs to understand child protection. I feel child protection, everybody, every single person who is responsible in running and managing these educational institutions should understand what child protection is. And of course, beyond that, maybe at a later stage, I would like to come in about the educational needs and protection intersecting once the child is rescued from a situation of exploitation, and when the child post rescue comes in contact with a very comprehensive child protection system. What happens to the education and the priority given to education of the child post the child's rescue, and do we really understand putting that child back into mainstreaming him into our educational institution is part of his or her rehabilitation. So I feel this is what I would like to start off with for all of us to think. Thank you, Preeti.
Thank you, Preeti. Well, very well said. Okay, I think Mr. Nair, you have joined us. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, ma'am, I can hear you.
So can we just now start with you for your and can you please, with your opening remarks, share how do you see, or you don't see the link between the education and the child protection, maybe as a theme, or maybe if both the systems or the institutions need to work together or not need to work together.
Thank you, ma'am. I find there is a direct and positive linkage between the two. Let me start with small examples. When last week I heard from Madam Preeti, my esteemed friend, that it applies to everybody. From that point, you may have heard about the Sakshi versus Union of India, a Supreme Court judgment. I happened to investigate that case where the father was abusing the daughter. I could not investigate. I was a DIG in CBI. I could not investigate the case because the child was saying something else and we wanted something else in the evidence. Now, we have to go back to a child psychologist, a child psychiatrist, a child forensic doctor. We took classes from that person. I remember still almost 10 days, evening time, spending hours and hours learning child psychology, learning as a senior police officer, senior IPS officer. So I'm talking about it's open to everybody. Everybody should learn child psychology and child protection measures. So when I could learn that, I could understand a bit of what psychology is, and I could take the matter to court of law, and finally went to Supreme Court of India. You must read the judgment. It's very interesting. All this have been brought out in the judgment too. So that part I'm trying to say is very important even for a police officer. Secondly, a case study I'm talking about is we set up something called anti-human trafficking clubs in the colleges and Panchayat Against Human Trafficking, PAHT, many places. Let me take the case of a Panchayat Against Human Trafficking and the Anti-Human Trafficking Club of a very interior place in Trivandrum district of Kerala on the Tamil Nadu border. They went to a village, a tribal village, exclusively tribal village, God's own country, you may say that. 32 children were in the tribal village, 23 children have been sexually violated by the grandfather or the father or the brother or the mother or the sister. Now, these children, when they start educating the children, not college or school education, they all have numeracy, they have literacy, they have, but this particular education, what is on child protection, that was completely missing. When they educated this anti-human trafficking club and the Panchayat Against Human Trafficking, empowered the children. Today, those children, all 32 children will say, we are not for bad touch, we are for good touch. We know what it is. Our father, grandfather, nobody can violate us. So there's a very strong linkage. Third example, I happened to do a study for World Bank, development versus trafficking. We all think when you develop the area, the trafficking will come down. In Mizoram and Assam, entire border areas, we did a field work based on evidence. We could find that entire the so-called development was on a transport corridor. I could find the transport corridors have become trafficking corridors. And the corridor approach was futile. I said corridor approach should be replaced by a community approach. Means what? Empowering the girls and children and women of that area. Unless the development focuses on the captive audience, not the displaced people, but people beyond their area, beyond their area. I call it a community approach. Community can be 1 mile to 15 miles. Get the women and girl child empowered, children empowered, and that made a huge difference. Third example, I will stop with that, is the Ram Manohar Lohia University of Lucknow. They have a LLB, LLM course, a 5-year integrated course, MBA, etc. Every bit, every after the 35 papers, every paper has got one chapter on child psychology, or sorry, child care. Every paper, every law student of every paper has to study one topic on child protection. Why not integrate child protection into the entire scheme of things? And whether it be arbitration law, whether it is a family law, whether it is any other law for that matter, there is one chapter on child psychology and child protection. I think that's a way to integrate in every bit. As Madam Preeti, last word, I would say that it has to be integrated in the education of every person, everybody. That's essential and mandatory, I would say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nair. Naveen, over to you for your opening remarks.
Thanks, Preeti. Just 3 quick points. See, one is that from our experience of working with children, rescuing at railway stations, we have seen that 15% of the children who have left home, their reasons were directly linked to school and what's happening in school. And these are primarily, there are children who are not able to cope with education, but they are sort of forced to go to school again and again, children facing bullying and abuse, but they couldn't really get a solution at home when they even share about it, discrimination at school. And then children are not able to do well in exams. They are afraid of getting back to the family with when the exam results are out, and then they just leave the family. So, at one end, we are saying that education plays a push factor of children leaving their families. On the other hand, we have also seen that after reunifying children back to the family, and when we do follow up, we have seen that out of 100, say, children who have continued to stay back with the family, almost 63% of the children have got back to the school and are continuing the education. And if I also include the children who have joined a vocational training, children who are above 15, 16 years, joined an vocational course and continuing the course, it's around 2%, around 65% are getting back. And there we have seen that they, are continued follow-up of 1 year or 2 year. We're able to see that they are continuing to go back to school. But the larger issue is, third and the final point, is that there are the rest of the children, like 15% and the rest of the children, they're leaving because of several other push factors, which is related to they not feeling safe, or they being forced to work because they have to contribute to the family income, or they're being trafficked. So there's a huge spectrum of protection issue. So so the way that, just to conclude, education, from our experience, I would say that is, it can actually play a push factor of pushing children out of families into an unsafe situation. And but if it could be leveraged, it can actually also help children get reintegrated with family and community.
Thank you, Ravi. I will come back to all the panelists once again, but before that, Suresh, over to you for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Preeti. I see there is a strong connection between the children not going to schools and the child laborers. See, I have many examples where upon rescue, when children come back to the community, their parents say that my children went to school, but there was no proper education there. That's why child left the school. So I see child labor is the second stage. a child before ending up in child labor leaves the school. So there is, to me, there is a very strong connection between these two. Even upon rescue, when children come back after months or after years, they are in a position that even if you try to provide them any support to go back to the school, they are not able to join a school. Why? Because the precious time, very productive time, they have lost. So to me, pretty very strong connection between these two. Give you some of the examples that we find success in stopping their re-trafficking with only those children who come back and their age is such that they can be sent to the school and they can stay in the school and they can acquire the education because their parents feel satisfying that something good to happening to their children. Otherwise, they feel frustrated and they find that it is a waste of time sending children to a school. So better send them out to work. And they say that they will acquire a skill with which they can earn livelihood when they grow up. Thank you, Priti.
Thank you, Suresh. I will definitely come back to you. So, Mr. Nair, I would like to again come to you first. And may I request you to share your experiences on how the legal system and the civil society has worked together to combat child trafficking, and what are the key challenges or gaps that requires our urgent attention, especially if we talk about, the legal framework or at the policy level, what should be done?
So one example I gave from that anti-human trafficking club itself is a prevention model. We need to empower the panchayats. Today, we have two extremes. One is a cell phone culture where we think many children are safe at home and they're doing the studies in cell phone. Other one is phoneless children. God knows how many children are there. We all know that. Now, those children, let me talk about those children who are deprived of cell phones and etc. They are all, you think we are all safe at home. They are not. Integrated Child Protection Fund did a study recently, and that study shows in a matter of 2 months' time, 5 million Indians have gone to the net looking for child pornography. 5 million Indians have gone to the net looking for child pornography. When 5 million Indians have gone to the net looking for child pornography in a matter of 2 months' time, that is a shame, national shame, which shows that so many fellows are from 100 cities in India are visiting during COVID time. They are going into the child pornography means first and foremost, child pornography is available. Number two, child pornographers are making big business because so many people are hitting the thing. Once hit means so much money. And third is child pornography is in high demand. And fourth and foremost, and very important, is child pornography is being manufactured, being made. Where are they manufactured? They are not making hotels or beach resorts. They are now making it at home. So so-called home houses where we think children are safe have become an abode of exploitation children, many places. Therefore, we need to reach out to the houses. We need to reach indoors now. If the children have to be safe, the prevention matter, we need to go into the houses. How do we do that? In a very, very difficult scenario, but there challenges are there, solutions are also there. So panchayat is one area I would suggest, empowering the panchayats, through them empowering the public, through them empowering the mothers, empowering the sisters, empowering the children, empowering the girl children. The example I gave was 32 children today can stand up and say, small village, interior village, and a matter of 3 days time, the people could do the difference that we are not for sale. We are not for exploitation. Nobody can exploit us. That courage and confidence, if we can give to our children, I think we can make a difference. Number two, coming to a cell phone, when I mentioned earlier, the whole thing is a demand. If there is demand, trafficking will take place in different forms. So how do we address the demand? The anti-human trafficking clubs, anti-human trafficking club in the colleges, the way you have yachting club and debating club and fancy club, same thing. All the clubs, those clubs are for individual promotion. Those clubs are for individual promotion. Here is a club you do for others. You spend some time for others too. Why not? Spend little time. Your children are very great assets. No, the youth become a very important asset. The youth means college children can have a tremendous power. Tremendous power. I saw them when you mobilize them into anti-human trafficking clubs, making a huge difference in the entire scenario. Just give an example again. The anti-human trafficking club in Ernakulam Law College, they went into a website, Locando services on escort services, and they went further. It's not so easy to go. They will not leave out. but you send your cell phone, then they give information. Went on for a few days. Finally, they said, okay, we'll give you a Bengali girl in Ernakulam for a sex massage or something like that. And they checked the person, checked the number, etc., etc., etc. Everything was done. Finally, the student volunteered to do that. But of course, he informed the police. And then they went, the boy took the courage, and there was a person right there taking him left and right, going around to avoid police, and finally managed to go to the place. The boy got the police. Police arrested them. Around 50 fellows were arrested, and 3-4 girls of different states were rescued from Kerala a few years back. What I'm trying to say is demand is very important. Unless you address demand, we cannot do that. So I find in preventing trafficking, child trafficking, containing demand is a very important thing, where our children, our youth can have a very important role. Setting up anti-human trafficking club in the colleges can be a great model. I have an SOP for anti-human trafficking clubs. About somebody published, and another SOP for a panchayat against human trafficking. I can share with you. You can share with your colleagues, whomso you want. Please do that. Then let me stop with one more point. Child Welfare Committee in Jaipur was telling me, Nayak Saab, the same child appeared before me thrice over in a matter of 2 months' time. Same child appeared before me thrice over in a matter of 2 months' time. Don't you think it's a shame for people like me or anybody who is rescuing a child? Do you think children are commodities for being recycled? So somebody rescues a child and somebody puts on the website, I have rescued 21 and 31 or whatever number you want to, and the child is sent to a CWC in another place. That CWC sends the child back home, and the trafficker takes the child back home, and the child back to place of exploitation. The child is being recycled. So that CWC statement itself, it rings in my mind that we are making the children recycle and recycle. That means what is required is rescue along with rehabilitation. Childline is doing a great job. I appreciate them. I really appreciate them. I speak volumes about them. What the Childline does is they give to CWC. What is required is the CWC should call the police, call the reinforcement agencies. Police should take action against the traffickers, and rehabilitation agencies shall take rehabilitation steps. Unless you take that rehabilitation step, unless you integrate rescue along with rehabilitation, it cannot be prevented. That's a golden rule. We need to have rehabilitation integrated with the rescue. Now, in the new law which is going to come, I hope it's going to come in the when I had an opportunity of sending a draft long back, 2016-17, but one chapter is exclusively on rehabilitation. And there's a preamble to the chapter which was given. I hope it's there in the present thing. And what does the preamble say? That rehabilitation is not a welfare act; it's a mandatory. It's a right. It's a right to the person. Article 23 of the Constitution, Dr. Ambedkar prepared, and that Constitution says human trafficking is prevented. And all of us are stakeholders, and all of us are duty holders, because we, the people of India, gave to ourselves a constitution. In that, we have written that human trafficking is prevented, is prohibited. That means we are all duty holders. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, when that constitution says so much, we are all duty holders under the constitution. It's a mandatory on our part to ensure that each child is safe, each one is safe. From that protective, from that method, from that paradigm, it is the right of every child to be protected, and no child shall be sold. Therefore, all of us are duty holders. From that perspective, on the addressing the vulnerabilities in the rural areas, and addressing the vulnerabilities in the cell phone culture, and addressing the demand by empowering the anti-human, by the clubs in the colleges, young youth in the society can make a huge difference. I can go on speaking, but let me contain here, because let me allow the other speakers also to speak. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Nair. Okay, coming back to you, Preeti. So you focused on, everyone need to come forward for the protection of children, and it can't be like we can't have a selective approach. And you also focused on how the education institutions can play a larger role in the awareness generation, and also, in the rehabilitation of children, victims and survivors of abuse, especially. So the audience, and I would like to very interesting ideas of yours, because Prerna has worked a lot related to on the issue of child trafficking and child protection. So what has worked the best? If we say that this is the audience that, we want to learn from you, what has worked the best? What are the strategies that you looked into? What are the indicators in the program design and in the monitoring we need to focus on, so that, the kind of efforts that we need to put in for the safety of children is going to bear some results. Over to you, Preeti.
Thanks for asking me this question. I think what worked for people like us, Prerna, we have Railway Children here, several organizations, is, did we listen to children? Did we hear them? Did we ask them what works best for them? And I think every time our programming, our policies, our laws, includes the voices of children, the voices of the community, I think we've come out with very practical, doable solutions. So this is first. Are we giving importance, be it the child protection system or the education system? Are we giving importance to children's voices? Number one. Two, do we have an understanding of what child-friendly means? A very comprehensive understanding of what exactly child-friendly means, child-friendly approach, procedures, or tokenism and decoration in our child-friendly approach. Three, when we are talking about victims of any form of violence, and Dr. Nair also mentioned about mental health, it's so important, be it the school, be it any child protection services, how client, child-centric, victim-centric, trauma-informed, and recently we've had a discussion that we shouldn't end at trauma-informed. Are we trauma-focused as well? And the third, again, what Dr. Nair spoke about, what systems are in place to ensure there is no re-victimization and re-trafficking? Because the day re-victimization and re-trafficking happens, the child loses faith in us, loses faith in the system, and the perpetrators become stronger and stronger by the day, going all out without any consequences. So this is my, next. The next is, do we have a community approach? One, we spoke about children's participation. Where is our community approach? Is community involved in protecting children and in the development of the child? Both, because I've been talking about the intersection here. It's a handful of us doing something. We are all working in silos. Of course, we come together. That is different, but we still find ourselves working in silos, not involving. And when I say community, I just don't mean families. Community has so many other other institutions there. There is the political party, there is the elected representative, there is, under the integrated child protection scheme, you have the child protection committee. Where is their role? Even today, we shy away from involving the local corporator, the elected representative, thinking, oh my God, if we are associated with them, we would appear as being very apolitical. It's high time we put on these responsibility on these institutions. Where is the resource mapping? Where is the vulnerability mapping? And I always say, and I love these models, which include Prerna's model, I love these community-based child protection service centers linked with education. For example, mobile creches. See the rate of, every time you have such community-based, Railway Children spoke about their own drop-in centers at railway stations. The minute you have these community-based centers for children, where they can access, they can be contacted, they know whom to reach when there is a need. Community-based centers. So, mobile creche is a model, Rainbow Children's is model. Let's look at Prerna's model, where all our night care centers were situated in a municipal school. Direct link with protection. We ensured that the educational system, and kudos to Bombay Municipal Corporation, who could see that if we had to disrupt the intergenerational cycle of human trafficking, existing and deep rooted in the red light area. The model, the way forward is ensure education and protection walk together hand in hand. So a model where the night care center is situated in a municipal school, we have so much of infrastructure just lying unused with the education department. Why is it that this infrastructure is not used for community centers, for children who come there, who learn, who interact with us, where we give them their right to information so that they are in a position to make informed choices moving forward? Give them life skills, give them independent living skills, also support them with their curricular activities. Our schools are not enough. They are just checking the box. If the child has to really learn today, if the education has to be meaningful for him, and eventually he has to see the result of how it sustained him, I think the child in the coming few years is going to require these kind of support system to retain him in school. I feel these kind of approaches, the public-private partnership, the health sector, my last point, the health sector has a proactive and a promotional, approach. I think we need to have that kind of an approach. Just a preventive and rehabilitation approach is important, is relevant, is making sense. We are seeing results, but I think we need to go a little further and look at these other three approaches as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Preeti, for explaining such wonderful strategies. And I'm sure this is going to remain with us for a very, very long time. Moving to Naveen. Naveen, we all know that railway children work with children in difficult circumstances. The railway platform children on the street, off the streets. So I'm sure you are the apt person to discuss here. How to weave in, and you have already mentioned that how you see the linkages between education and the protection. So how, as a strategy, you weave in this in your program? So what has, again, my question will be, what has worked and what hasn't worked? Where do you see the challenges?
Thanks, Preeti. So just start with two experience of working with children. Just in November in Darbhanga railway station, we rescued two children around 13 years old. And so after having spoken to the children for a few minutes, so the outreach workers got to know that they had actually left the home because they had started to go to school because the schools have opened. They were actually finding it hard to cope with the new routine of going to school daily. In addition to that, they were finding it difficult to cope with the classes. And one fine day, one of the boy had a fight within the school, and he saw that the teacher actually scolded him, which he thought was unfair. And so he got really offended, and then he decided to leave, and he asked his friend whether he wants to accompany, and then they both decided to leave. They landed at Darbhanga railway station, and right now, the team is working with them. They're living in a childcare institute there, in a government-run childcare institute. The team is working with them. So the kind of conversations we're having now is that if the reunification has to happen, like we have started to speak to the parents and so on and so forth, this whole context has to be addressed. The school has to be a part of the discussion, parents, of course, inevitably, and then children being at the center. So that's one context. So I'll talk about another experience, which is in 2019 pre-COVID scenario. So we rescued a child who was around 16 years old in a railway station in Salem, and this was the second time we had rescued. So then the workers started to get deeper and understand the issues in depth. So as Dr. Nair had said at one point in time, that it's just after the rescue, it is important that the kind of quality time that we spend with the child and get to understand the depth of the issue, as what also Preeti also had mentioned, to understand what is really making the child live again and again. So the second time around, we got to know that the child was in 11th standard, wanted to continue the education, but the mother wanted the child to take up a job because the family was going through economic crisis. So they thought that it would be an additional income. So there were a lot of conflicts, and the child one day decided to leave, and then was reunified. Then again, few months back, the same child decided to leave. So second time around in the reunification process, then the team took that time to work with the child, with the family, with the school, and of course, the child welfare committee was at the center of this whole discussion. And an elaborate follow-up plan was put in place. A family support plan was put in place, and then the reunification happened, and we had to really follow up for a long duration time to make sure that the child continued to finish the school and get to the college. And there were issues in between, and what really helped was that to stay in touch with the family and the child for a longer period of time. So two different scenarios: one where the experience in school pushing the child out, other where the child really wants to continue with the school. And so when that is made sure, then the child sort of gets back to the family and continues to stay back. So this, as I said, in our experience, we've seen that school education per se acts as both sides of the coin. Now, quickly, a few points on this is that, again, I want to remind that this is only 15% of the children for whom school education is somewhere a reason where they are pushed out of the family. And so this whole process revolves around school education per se. The second important point, which is quite critical, is that from our experience, what we have seen is that majority of the children whom we have rescued, like almost 85% of the children have been going to school. Either they have dropped out at some point in time, or they are continuing the education while they have left the family. And most of them are first generation learners. So, and looking at this with the fact that most of the families from where these children come from are daily wage laborers, landless, agrarian laborers, small business, and they all are living in a difficult circumstances. But at some point in time, the families have made an effort to get children education. So that's a key point that would really help us when we work with the families and children after reunification in the context of reintegration. And follow-up has showed that children who have continued to live with families, a large number of them have continued to go back to school. So as Preeti had said, the children who are dropped out of the school, there's high chance that they will slip into street life or child labor or get into other forms of risk. So that's something that's broadly seen in the sector. Now, this is about only education and children who are rescued and reintegration. But largely, if you see, there are children who are leaving for work. For example, when we work with children in Salem, there are a group of children who are leaving Chhattisgarh, Odisha, Bihar, and they end up in Salem district to work in certain factories around. So there, family reunification is seldom a option, because as Dr. Nair had said, the children go back to the family, then actually in a different route they come back to the work. So there, a very concerted source to destination area network based reintegration process has to take place, where multiple stakeholders have to converge and work with a single focus of reintegrating the child. It has to be it has to be the DM of the Salem, the DM of the particular location in Chhattisgarh that work together, the child welfare committees, the NGOs, the NGOs which is rescuing there, and the NGOs which is working there on child protection issues at a community level, all at different level have to come together to make sure that the child is reintegrated. So here, getting back to the school or vocational training or supporting the family becomes incomplete unless and until there is a concerted network-based reintegration work that happens. Just to conclude, we did a study a few years back on children who have been reunified and who have continued to stay back, why they have stayed back, and children who have, after reunification, have left. So what are the reasons? So what we learned is that specifically in the case of where children have stayed back, there are 4 key reasons that emerged. One is when children went back with greater resilience, they were able to cope with, because most of the children were actually getting back to the same difficult situation which the family was living in. But they actually had gone back with increased resilience. So when a work was happened to increase the resilience of the family, the child continued to stay back. Second is when the child got back and developed an attachment figure within the family, the child continued to stay back. Third was when the child got back to the school and enjoyed going to school, the child has stayed back. And the fourth is when the child felt that the life alone in street was more riskier than in family, the child has stayed back. So, I would like to conclude here.
Thank you, Naveen. Thank you so much for giving us this perspective. Suresh, moving to you. You have worked a lot on on the issue of rehabilitating trafficked children and also child laborers. So how do you see what has worked in your programs? Where do you see the gaps and challenges? And also just not education, how do you see the life skill or the skill, the vocational skill-based education as a strategy, whether it has worked, not worked? What do you suggest? So over to you, Suresh.
Thank you, Preeti. I'll just start with the vocational skill. See, the vocational skill building program in India is SAM for child trafficking survivors. Why? Because initially they deprived of education, and then you set a certain benchmark, minimum qualification, which they don't qualify. See, the government of India brought down the age from 18 to 16 for such children, but they didn't bring down the age education qualification. I mean, this thing that this is the minimum level of education with which they can work at the workplace. This is completely SAM to the child traffic survivors. Second thing, I'll repeat, most of my friends have told what is happening at the ground because all are very learned. I'll tell you, Preeti, I get success where either child protection committees are working. I get success in Dr. Nayar's term, recycling of rescue child labor. I get success where child gets back to a school and their parents start supporting them. See what happens? Needless to mention that why such parents want their children to drop a school. Child trafficking is something, child labor is something that there is a particular section in India is getting affected. I'll tell you, in Gaya, we have been working with 700. This 700, 500 children come from only one community, that is Musar. And most of them are from Gaya. In Gaya, we have been working with 400 child trafficking survivors. And they don't have any access to education. They are the first generation in their family, but still they're discontinued for some reason. So we need to invest completely in that. I'll tell you what we practice in Gaya. Like, we have been working in 150 places, activating child protection committees. With this, and we opted these 150 places where incidences of child trafficking were high. And these committees successfully helped many rescued children to stay back there. I am telling Nair sir, why children recycle? Because they become very skilled. Their fingers start working. I say that, why does it happen in recycling? Because the children, there is a demand-driven problem. There are industries which run on only on a small fingers. These nimble fingers becomes very expert after months. And once they are rescued, they go back to the children. We need to choke the demand, as you see, Dr. Nair. So there are things, multiple things are at play. But most importantly, I'll tell you at this forum that please work around investing in education. Make sure that every child gets educated. Before rescue and after rescue, a lot of harms happen to our children. Why? Why everyone said that before becoming a victim of trafficking, child leaves a school. So the disconnection starts from a school. So we need to work around that how to make sure that every child of this country gets educated. So that a lot of parents, those who are not educated, they can be easily duped by our traffickers, cannot be duped again with the power of education. I'm telling, we have been practicing child protection committees, and with this child protection committee, we got tremendous success in Gaya. Why? Because upon rescue, when they come back to the community, there should be something to fall back on. I mean, any organizations, I'm not naming any organizations, it has limitation, but the government has its presence everywhere. So does the CPC, multi-layered, right from ward to panchayat to the block to the district to a state. I mean, what is our children are facing upon rescue? It can be addressed so that they don't get re-trafficked. I'll tell you many examples. Upon first we rescued in Jaipur, and second FIR we had to lodge in Gaya in 4 instances, and one of the instances even Dr. Nair also called to SSP Gaya. Why? Because the same thing, child trafficking is a demand-driven problem. Our skilled children are in high demand. Oppressors, child traffickers, they know that the particular child who has just come back after rescue, after going through the child juvenile justice process, is at home, and he is an easy prey because no one is behind the child to help them stay at home. So we need to activate CPC. We need to activate SMC, the school management committees also. Why do our schools, fail in having children in their premises? That's a huge challenge. I'm coming back to education. We need to work on education. If we don't work on education, we work around that, our children will go to the work. We need to work on education. We need to work on prosecution. Let's prosecute. Every person who is trafficking our children, prosecute. That's it from my side, Preeti, because much what I'm going to speak have spoken by my friends, Preeti, Nair sir. I have worked with Nair sir earlier, and Naveen also.
Thank you, Suresh. No, thank you so very much. In few minutes, you just explained it and you're bang on. So I'm going to now take few questions for the panelists that we have been receiving in the chat box, and also we have received during the registration. Okay, so one is right here. Suresh, it is for you. So the participant is asking, can you share how you work with the rescued children in Gaya among the Musahar? You mentioned that you work closely with CWC, but how do you integrate the school system? Are there any special strategies you adopt? Please share.
Yes, Kriti, it goes without saying that Gaya has the highest number of child trafficking survivors and even child laborers officially in Bihar. So we chose Gaya to work. And needless to mention that the children are Musha children. So we designed multi-pronged approach, right from keeping their mothers engaged with the SHG, keeping their sister engaged with the adolescent group. Why? Because, the same home, violation of child rights were happening, the boys were getting trafficked to Jaipur and the girls were ended up as child marriage. So we made an adolescent committee. We provided them stitching skills. At the same time, we made a sports group where youth came together, they played together, and we also provided them newspaper. And we arranged police and public meeting. You know what happened in this community? If trafficker comes, even if they know that it should not be happened, they don't reach out to the police. So we organized multiple police community meeting, taking community where incidences of child trafficking were high to the police station, and taking police, especially child welfare police officer with the DALSA, District Legal Services Authority, to the communities. And we developed a very good connection between police and community. In multiple occasions, these people called directly to the Thana. Like the same fellow had come and they are just forcing us. They are saying that they would carry our children, please save us. And many children we could save. So even micro enterprises, like a family income is very low, we help them to set up micro enterprises so that they can raise it. And you'll be very happy, Preeti. Our many children are studying in a residential school and they have been doing well. Their parents give me a call. Sir, my child wants to go to a school. Kab bhejenge aap? So these are multiple things that we applied and we got success. Thank you.
I can see one question on technology. So Dr. Nair, since you addressed the issue of online safety, so I'm addressing to you. So the question is, with technology-enabled education initiatives, cutting off human interaction, what challenges do you foresee with reintegrating traffic victims back into the society? Dr. Nair, can you please address this?
The question is not of technology, it's the challenges in reintegration. The challenges in reintegration are essentially the problem lies in the non-convergence of the stakeholders. When Ms. Preeti was speaking about the Prerana model, there are so many plus, but I find that inclusiveness is very interesting. Even the child there has a right to speak. That's the inclusiveness which she has brought in. When Mr. Suresh was talking about the convergence of all the agencies, you find a pattern there. So that means all agencies together. So unless you have all agencies coming together, now here are cases where people are coming together out of commitment. Now, unless we need to bring it under a mandate also, under the law also. So if a new trafficking law comes in, that convergence can be brought in. I agree that law cannot be the be-all end-all of everything. It has to go beyond that. But still, an accountability on the statutory agencies will come. There are so many statutory agencies today. You may be aware of the anti-human trafficking units in the police. I was privileged to set up the first 9 of them in 2007. Now, all districts in the country, 720 districts in the country have anti-human trafficking unit. How many of them are functional? How many of them are not functional? If people like us can walk into the AH and tell them, boss, I'm here shaking hand with you, let's take it forward. Wherever the civil society has walked into the police stations and shook hands with the anti-human trafficking units, they are compelled to deliver. So I would say that sort of convergence by one step forward approach, an outgoing approach civil society can do, and police can do this way also. It can make a difference. Anti-human trafficking units can be made functional. Second point I mentioned about the youth, involving the youth in anti-human trafficking clubs. If we have all colleges in the country set up anti-human trafficking club, have your yachting club and fancy club and everything, that's a different issue, but let's have anti-human trafficking club also. Demand will be contained. If we have panchayat against human trafficking, at least all the vulnerable panchayats from Kokrajhar and Assam right down to Kanyakumari here, if we can have a vulnerable panchayats where panchayat against human trafficking can be set up, that also can be addressed. So the issues of reintegration will come in when the systems are functional, systems are not dysfunctional. In that scenario, the very close linkage of rescue and rehabilitation. Rehabilitation means a complete package, as Madam Preeti rightly said about psychological counseling, financial rehabilitation, sustained livelihood. All those have to come in. I'll start with a small example. Naxalites, we have only heard about Naxalites giving a lot of problem, etc. I was handling the issue of Naxalites for 5 years in CRPF as head of operations. When a lot of encounters used to take place, men getting killed at this side and men getting killed that side. Suddenly I found one encounter, 5 of my men died, and I had 3 dead bodies with me. They were postmortem says 15, 16, 17 aged girls. 15, 16, 17 aged girls with all sort of body protector, weapons, helmet, everything is there. My heart stopped for a moment. Are they Naxalites or are they children? Are they Naxalites or are they children? It needs serious thinking. And then we thought of for a while and did a lot of work and brought out 140 women and 240 men from the Naxalite stronghold and trained them, employed them as security guards, carpenters, industrial stitching, and whatnot. We are not publicize their photograph. We don't want the publicity. But the point is that has broken the backbone of the so-called Naxalites in the country. You know, how you bring out, people give life, they want sustained livelihood option. What is required is when you make a livelihood option, that will be sustained. It should be something which respects the dignity of the person, respects the right of the person, respects the livelihood option of the person. I think from that perspective, we can bring in, we can make a huge change in preventing re-trafficking and taking this mission forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nair. Thank you so much for giving us your valuable time. Moving ahead, Preeti, I have two questions for you, but please feel free to pick up anything, and if other panelists also want to comment on. So I'm sure you are the best person to comment on. One of the participants is asking how to avoid, we call it do not harm principle. Whenever we are doing our child rights programming or the child protection related activities, how to not put children in further harm. First is this question, and second is, if you can, though you have explained all in depth the strategies, but do we have any community based models to address the which have been effective against child maltreatment? So these are the two questions.
Thank you, Preeti. So I'll just go to the first question of how do we help children, understand that it's their right not to be harmed. How do we get into this messaging? And I strongly feel we need to have age-appropriate conversations with children, which we don't. We don't know how to have conversations with children. All we know is a one-sided, directed, approach towards children, where we tell children what to do and what not to do. So like I said earlier, let's get into conversation, be it parents, be it caregivers, be it social workers, be it a school teacher. It's so important that we, have this conversation. The other is, I think, listening to children, not blaming them for what has happened. Our education system also, we didn't have time, but this whole issue of stigma, this whole issue of discrimination, this whole issue of not giving anybody a chance, these are things that children pick up, they sense, right? And that's what is important, I feel, in our conversation. If children have to understand harm, yes, you should tell them what harm is. Okay, very often the perpetrator confuses a child. The grooming process that the perpetrator puts a child through is basically to confuse the child. And for us to have these kind of conversations, one, we as adults, as duty bearers, as caregivers, need to be sufficiently equipped to learn and continue learning, to also learn from children, to update ourselves. So this is something I feel. And how do we have conversations with children which are non-threatening for the child? How do we have conversations with children which are very enabling for the child, whereby the child then takes on very confidently the responsibility of, one, reaching out when he even senses harm and responding when he senses harm. I think somewhere we need to bring children to that stage, be it in the online space or the offline space. Also talk to children about certain myths that, over a period our socialization has taught us. That harm is only outside the house, not inside the house. That harm is only from strangers. So being friendly with known people is okay. That, having trusted, decide who are people you trust, and that remains static. That does not remain static. Even trusted people, and data has shown it's people who take the trust of children and only then start breaking it and start violating children. So around harm, I think these are some of the areas that we need to have real great clarity. And like I said earlier, We need to be child-centric. We need to be trauma-informed. We need to focus around well-being. Coming to a very effective model, I won't name one. I feel, I have seen a couple of models. I don't want to name one and leave another, but the model that has really worked is a community-based model where there are community-based support centers, support facilities for children and family, especially children and mothers. I have seen communities where there are daycare centers. There is enough evidence showing that, in such communities, children themselves and children at large are more safer, more attending school and completing school. These community centers also become your empowering centers, where then children come and take it upon themselves to protect other children as well. So there is a lot of give and take. There's a lot of sharing. There's a lot of, collective problem solving when you have these community centers. And I've seen several. But again, the problem here is it's so either individual driven or NGO driven, or even when there is public-private partnership in taking this model forward, somewhere it is individual driven, and we need to take it to the next level where we now ensure it reflects in our policies, our programs, where people don't see, at the government, they don't see civil society as a threat. Where we really see that together we can protect these children, together we can have better outcomes. And today's webinar is all about measuring outcomes, right? Educational outcomes, be it child protection outcomes. I think we'll have, we speak so much about health outcomes, education outcomes. We hardly speak about child protection outcomes. And today is such a good platform where we are talking about intersection between two. So when these two intersect, what should be the outcomes? And the outcomes, I think, will be really phenomenal if we go through a partnership model, which is very, over a period, which has a systemic approach and not is not dependent on an individual's commitment here and an individual commitment there. So we have models, we have enough models, we can, and they're sufficiently documented through proper research. I think we just want people at policy level to read them, to listen, and not just keep making, Preeti, I'm just taking one more minute. I think the way forward is not having laws and not having, newer policies. I think the way forward is putting systems in place. The way forward is helping communities, marginalized communities, to feel that my child is safe. The minute they feel that, we've seen how education is accessed, how children continue to stay in school and complete education and benefit from that education. I think at the end of the day, what we need to see is our children benefiting from our education. Thank you so much again for giving me so much time to share my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Preeti. Thank you. Naveen, I can see your hand, and also, I wanted to ask the similar question to you also, because you also directly work with children. So how to avoid this do not harm thing, how to work towards do not harm principle.
Thanks, Preeti. Just adding to Preeti on that, I think the one another area that we have to very seriously consider is the whole child safeguarding policy. I think every organization, not only organizations working with children, I guess all the civil society organizations, of course, even for-profit organizations should have a child safeguarding policy where we all understand what are the contexts where we can harm children, even in the context of people like us who are working with children on child protection. We should be conscious of and mindful of the context where we might end up harming children. The do's and don'ts that we have to follow, right from the trustees of the organization to the chief executive to the grassroots people, and how would we help people who are directly working with children to continuously equip themselves better to work with children. The challenges that they face, day in and day out, working with children, how would we help them to sort of understand and better respond every time when they face the challenge, so that there is the elements of safeguarding gets minimized. And the third is that it is important that as a part of this policy, we set values for ourselves, which means that how would we behave, each one of us within the program context, so that together we create an environment within the program where the children would feel nurtured and they feel free to express, so that their recovery would start, so that their resilience would happen. As an adult working with them, we need to create an environment, and what we have to focus is about how our behavior. That's quite important. Just wanted to add these point around child safeguarding policy on an incredible initiative to avoid any further harm of children within the program.
Thank you, Naveen. So the key takeaways that we got from the expert panelist is we need to work with the panchayats. We need to work with the children agencies. We need to engage with the youth, not only for redressal reporting, but also in the rehabilitation, because we need to break the demand cycle if you want to talk about the sustainability of our efforts. Also important is to listen to children. So child participation is very, very important. Also need to understand, if we say always, child-friendly procedures, child-friendly approaches, then what does it mean? We need to jot down what does it mean. Also need to have the policy or the guidelines or SOPs or our program intervention need to be child-centric, victim-centric, trauma-focused. This is one very important issue. Also, what we need to focus on is working with the child, community-based child protection mechanism, the community-based child protection committees. And also important is not only talking about bringing back the children in the school, but also where children are willing to come in the schools, but there are family vulnerabilities, maybe because of poverty or other social protection issues. The family forces the child, though the child is willing to, to come in the school system, but forced to leave the school system. There also we need to work very closely. When children are in the school, we also need to consider the fact that we need to create an environment which is safe for the children, where the children and the parents are feeling, when they're sending their children to the school, they're feeling safe about, they're feeling happy about it. So we need to create that school environment. Also important is, we need to have age appropriate conversations. We need to have community-based child support centers in place, establishing social capitals. Why not? Why not to do this? This is going to go, this is going to sustain our affairs. Also important is to putting system in place. We have laws, we have policies, we have guidelines, we have government orders, but what is important is to have the systems in place. We need to look into the quality of implementation of the policies and the laws. Also important is the child safeguarding policy. We need to, as Preeti started with her opening remarks, this is not about you, me, or we can't single out one individual, we can't single out one institute, entity, but it is everyone's duty to protect the children and safeguard the children. So with these key takeaways, I am concluding this session. Over to you, Sabina.
Thank you all so much for a wonderful session. This has been a very meaningful discussion, and we will be actually disseminating a lot of these as key highlights, as a separate white paper, as notes. I truly, truly welcome feedback and interaction with the Evaluation Observatory on all our social media, our Facebook page, and on our website, as well as all and LinkedIn profiles. Please get in touch with us. We're very excited by this, and we hope that this continues forward. I would love to first and foremost give my sincere thanks to Preeti Mahara, who did a wonderful job moderating today's session and gaining such wonderful insights through this whole thing. Preeti Patkar, for your truly groundbreaking perspective, and also for being fearless in some of the recommendations that you gave out there. Naveen, thank you so much for the sheer sincerity that you brought to this entire conversation. And Suresh, I know he's already stepped out, and Dr. Nair, again, for the immense amount of collaboration that they brought to it, the partnerships that are possible, and how you can actually stay participative throughout. I cannot thank everyone enough, but I'm so grateful for everyone's participation and the time that you took out to build this, to make this a success today. I cannot wait to see how this turns out. Please stay in touch, and again, you will see a lot of dissemination coming from the EO about this event. Thank you all and have a great night.